Welcome back to the Don't Worry About It podcast, where we talk all things mental health related, from anxiety to depression, from happiness to sadness, and all emotions and feelings in between. On today's episode, I wanted to dive in to how emotions and feelings play a role in mental health. So I asked my friend Zak Lenik to come onto the show. Zak grew up in New York and moved to Israel 2 years ago. He currently works in digital marketing and creates his own content. Zak and I met 5 years ago when we both worked at a summer camp, and we had a lot of conversations about emotions and feelings. I hope you enjoy our conversation today. Thanks for listening. Zak, welcome to the Don't Worry About It podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Zak, I'm curious, what has your experience been like with mental health?
So it's kind of funny because I saw, I think it was maybe last week or the beginning of this week, I saw that you started making this podcast and I listened to a little bit of an episode and I was really impressed. I really liked it. I reached out and I said, hey, good job making this thing. And he said, yeah, I'd love to have you on, talk about mental health. And I thought to myself that was, I feel like I don't really have much to say about mental health. I felt particularly underqualified, to be honest. And then when we spoke a few days ago to discuss about the podcast and everything, I think really after talking with you for a while, I think you really made me sensitive to the fact that mental health is just as prevalent to everybody's life as physical health. The question is just, are you being healthy or not being healthy? And I think really, thank God, in my life, granted, everyone deals with a degree of anxiety, insecurities, things like that. I really feel like I've had very strong relationships and a lot of, love and belief placed in me by my parents, my father. And I really feel like I haven't suffered the way I hear people talk about it and the way I think a lot of people suffer from it when they bring up the topic of mental health.
Yeah, I think that was such an interesting conversation we were having because when we were chatting, I really felt that that it was interesting to see that you didn't see why I'd want to talk to you because based off all the conversations we've had in our lives that have been really tailored around mental health and as somebody who's mentally healthy, it's how it manifests, right? I always start this podcast out saying it's about anxiety, everything about mental health from anxiety to depression, but also about all feelings and emotions in between. And those are completely tailored together. And how you deal with your feelings and your emotions absolutely impact how your mental health. If it manifests in anxiety, you become depressed, and a lot of other mental illnesses are actually really can be very much connected to your ability to process their feelings and emotions. And that's why I was so interested in talking with you, because it's something I know we've chatted about for a very long time together.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it really is a good analogy to work with, that the same way with physical health, you're affected by everything you eat, all the activities you do, how you treat your body, how you even feel about yourself. All of those will affect your physical health in the same exact way with your mind. The things that enter into your mind and the way you talk, the things you do with your mind, the way you engage will determine your state of mental health. I believe 100%.
I agree. And as somebody who's feels that you're pretty mentally healthy, can you tell me about what you've done to create that?
So, I mean, it's really tough to say because it's not something that I think, thank God, that I'm in a position to speak from this place, but it's not something you think like, oh, wow, feel mentally healthy now. You know what I mean? It really is it's a response kind of as like a feedback mechanism. I hear other people talk about depression, anxiety, things that are mentally debilitating. And I just don't always really relate to what people are saying. I relate that people are going through pain. I relate in a kind of a more abstract sense, but I really, thank God, these things don't weigh down on me the way that I hear other people do. And, again, in terms of what I think has contributed to that is really a few things, but definitely from a young age, strong relationships with the. I mean, my dad, I think, more than anyone I can think of, has really imprinted a lot of belief in myself and a lot of, I'd say, guts to allow me to make myself vulnerable in situations and really grow, because I think that I can, I think that things will come out positively on the other end. And I think also as a young kid, being good at sports gives you a totally unprecedented social advantage, let's say, to creating relationships, because it's a type of currency that kids just are, attracted to. It's something that has given me a lot of ability to create relationships, and feel confident about myself because of really a gift that honestly came, pretty naturally to me. I mean, you practice, you do whatever, but I really, thank God every day for the kind of natural ability that I was born with.
It's interesting because sports in its way is its own language. Right? Anybody from any walks of life, especially in terms of basketball, is a great example. Basketball, all you need is one ball, and you need a certain amount of people on the court, and you just play. And you actually are, in a lot of ways, you have a conversation on the court without not necessarily even saying a word. The way you pass, the way you move, the way you shoot, the way everything kind of goes in motion is its own kind of language. And I think and especially if you're good at it, especially in high school where we put such an emphasis on sports, athletes are always put on a type of pedestal, but those athletes also have to deal with that. Right? They still face that adversity. And as somebody like you mentioned, you're naturally gifted. I'm sure you faced adversity on the court.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like you said, I really believe that basketball is a language in honestly a very deep way. In the same way that two people who are very fluent in a language can, speak that language well together, two people who are very skilled at basketball, it can work the same way. And I think really you can tell so much about people the way they play sports. You can tell if they're mature or immature, and how it's hard to say really how much they're focused on really the goal as opposed to their personal stake in the game. I really also team sports has given me a ton of social experience that has allowed me to create relationships. But really, that language that happens between playing and, like you said, passing, and like you said, everything like that, the decision making allows you to understand people in a specific way.
And it's interesting because you just use the word creating relationships, and that's something that you and I have spoken about at such length. And I really want to dive into what is a relationship?
What is a relationship? So it's funny. I really will borrow a little bit from actually a source in Torah, because I think it's just such a deep idea. But there's a Mishnah, there's a piece there that says, "Buy for yourself a friend," and it sounds like really weird language to talk about making friends, because you don't think about having friends as purchasing it. And it almost sounds like then you go and own them. And that's not the way I think it's supposed to be related to at all, at all, at all. I think if we think about what it means to own something, what ownership really entails, it's that, like, the definition that I like to work with is that whatever you are 100% responsible for. And so if my car breaks down, I'm the one who has to go deal with it. If my, jacket gets a rip, I'm the one who has to go sew it up. And all of these things that I take ownership for, it's whatever degree I take responsibility for. And so what I believe really the most fundamental element to creating a relationship is taking responsibility for that relationship, expecting nothing to be given to you, nothing, you know what I mean? Nothing's coming your way. And that it's something that actually requires a very active pursuit of. Granted, there are obviously people who you connect to more naturally, but there is a set of skills, and I think specific things that you can do to really bring those out and really make them manifest.
That's such an interesting way of putting it, because I think I agree with everything in that piece. And I'm just thinking about how that relates to, part of your mental health and part of right dealing with it, especially at right at an age like I'm at right now at 25. I think back to previous relationships that I've ever had, but was I and now like using that piece to actually connect to them. What were my relationships like, and how do they manifest? And I think a lot of kids out there deal with this. I think there are a lot of interesting friendship dynamics that are in play, but I wonder if there's a way to do it more meaning. There has to be a way to do it more meaningfully.
Yeah, so I'll tell you. I mean, I've worked with a lot of kids and really teenagers, young adults, and I see that there's a really unfortunate phenomenon that um, and I've seen this happen for sure in in various groups and circles where you'll see kids who are hanging out with each other and they say we're best friends, we get along so well, and they spend the entire time just really ripping on each other and tearing into each other and like not treating each other with respect, and all the things that you would define a healthy relationship as don't seem to be present there. And I really think that a lot of it comes down to what is really natural for a kid. And I'll say, like, when I was a kid, I didn't, I mean, thank God I've had, good relationships, but not for sure, not to the degree I have now. Um, I really think that there's a certain switch that happened for me, and it really allowed me to create extremely meaningful relationships with a wide variety of people.
Can you pinpoint when that switch happened in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, so as I was a kid, I mean, I had, certain, let's say, natural abilities that made, hanging out with people enjoyable. And I think it made people enjoy hanging out with me. And that was like sports and, just generic being okay, I guess, with people. But really, toward the end of high school, um, a little shout out to a very good friend of mine, Mitch Gold. We were spending a lot of time together. Very close friend of mine, really awesome person, and we were hanging out the summer after senior year of high school, and we had a bonfire one time. It's funny because as far as I've seen, I've talked to very few people who can pinpoint like one specific night that their life changed so drastically as I feel mine did. And so we were hanging out one night and we made a bonfire, and his brother came over with his brother's friends, and his brother and his brother friends are just intellectually stimulating people. And we had a conversation for 2 3 hours, whatever it was, into the night under the stars in Muncie. Beautiful place to have a bonfire, I should say. And I remember the most shocking thought came into my mind as I was on my way home, which was like, I just need to know math. And to give a little context, I was never a good student in high school. I never cared. I thought all of it was ridiculous. And I'd never thought anything like that before. I never valued math. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I really need to know math. It's just a map of the world. Like, how do I not feel the desire to go and learn it? How do I not already know it? And then I thought, I've never ever thought before in my life I need to know math. That was just a crazy, thought that crept into my head. And really from that night sparked a desire for knowledge, which after learning enough, just spending enough time, I guess, in a learning mentality, sparked a real spike in self-awareness, which spiked a lot of self-love, which I think really gives you the capacity to understand how best to relate with people and create a space really for them to want to engage with you.
Can you explain what you mean by a safe space or a shared space?
For sure. I think that generally, when we talk about really any conversation, the things that make us want to open up with other people are how much we sense that they are going to listen to us, how much they are going to really share the space that we are given by, I mean, giving by whatever we're going to say. So, for instance, this is a framework that I like to think about a lot, which is like everybody walks around kind of all day in a bubble, and that bubble consists of everything that goes on in your life. So I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I ate this for breakfast, I did that, I went there, I took care of this, I did that. You know what I mean? And then what happens, we're walking around in this bubble and we feel the desire to share with somebody. And so what we do is we walk up to somebody and we say something about our bubble, which is, I just went for a run for 5 miles. Now, that the response that you're almost forcing the person who you're talking to respond with is that they respond generally saying, "Oh, I just went for a run for 3 miles," or "I don't like running at all," or whatever it is. It's two statements that were said near each other, but there was no real overlap. I feel like it kind of gives people the illusion that they were having a conversation when really it was two almost independent statements that happened to come next to each other. And so I think what the visual idea is, in terms of the framework, is that you kind of just pushed your bubble onto somebody else, and then them feeling that pressure or a really competitive element of it kind of just does the same. They push back, right? And it's kind of cool to think about it as a bubble because you can take two bubbles, push them together, and they really can become a big bubble. And so that would be, I think, the visual representation of a shared space. And how would that work? That would work like, instead of me going up to a person and saying, I just went running, which is fine to want to talk about something that happened in your day. That makes a lot of sense. But if you really want to create a space that actually has people wanting to open up and has people actively listening, it would be translating the thought in your mind, which is, okay, I went running, I want to talk about running, to some type of question, to opening up to them. So you think, okay, I just went running for 5 minutes, 5 miles, and now I walk up to somebody and say, hey, do you ever go running? Or how do you feel about running? Or what do you think about running? Or do you like exercise? Whatever it is. And all of a sudden, they feel that you are interested in them. They will answer your question. And then often what happens is they will respond with a question. And all of a sudden, instead of the same exact drive and statements just translated a little bit, just kind of shifted a little bit, allows for a shared space, that bubble to actually join together and two people to actually interact with each other in a way that fosters relationship, in a way that has people more interested in connecting as opposed to just making random statements that begin with the word I. It blows my mind, honestly, when I walk around, how many statements are made that begin with the word I.
Zach, my mind is absolutely blown at this idea because I relate to it in my own personal life. I know the conversations that a lot of the times, unfortunately, that I have and that I've been, I'll listen to as well, and it'll blow my mind, is how many times you hear somebody tell a story, besides for all the stuff of people ripping on each other. That stuff I'd like to dive in more to understand, because I think it's so crucial for people's mental health. But even more so in terms of actually having conversations, it's all right. We'll use the running example. I just run. I feel the need to want to share that information because it means something to me, because I accomplished something. I'm not right if I'm not a runner, or if I did take my first mile. So I want to come share that with somebody. So I'll go to a friend and I'll say, hey, I just ran 5 miles, but I'm starting it out with I, about me. Then that person who, if I know that they also run, is going to be like, that's awesome. I also work out, and we'll have a conversation about the same topic that we're both interested in, but we'll leave that conversation actually not sharing much. We won't leave it connected.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity every time you have that desire to share, and it's sad, honest, to see sometimes how that desire with such little tweak can be something that penetrates a lot deeper than merely those, kind of statements that fall near each other, the ones that are totally I focused. Um, it's a shame. It really is. I think, though, what really allows for that, the mindset, let's say, that allows for that transition, like I was saying before, is that kind of element of self-love, in the sense where when I just went running, I don't need him to know that I just went running for me to feel good about it, right? But you can have the desire to share, and that's fine. But it'll just change that your desire to share now becomes a means for creating a connection. And you can get a lot more sensitive to that if you don't need the validation, if you don't need them to tell you something, if you don't have as much need because you're insecure about the fact, or because are dependent on more dependent, let's say, on people's validation, that will allow you, or that will really trick you into thinking that what you need to say to get it is I statements, is to kind of force the issue a little bit and almost make them give you what you're looking for. But very rarely does it actually translate to the validation that you're looking for and to the connection. And often both parties walk away, honestly, not even thinking about it at all, because the conversation doesn't really penetrate. It doesn't really leave a stamp. So you walk away almost forgetting about it instantly.
So, what ramifications do you think happen to people that aren't having meaningful conversations? They're having these on the surface conversations
Across the board, you're saying like people who never have these conversations, or as a
people.
habit more naturally have these conversations?
Yeah, I would say I feel like people are, for the most part, are having those I statement conversations. They're not penetrating. They're not getting deep. And I think that has to have a deep impact on people.
100%. And I just want to preface this next piece saying that I'm not, trained in any of these things. I am no expert on the topic. These are just opinions that have formed from, my own experience and hearing people talk about it. But I think that a lot of the factors that go into somebody having mental health issues is certain unresolved points of their life that never really got the time of day. They never really got spoken about, dealt with, thought about, felt, understood. And the avenue, or the vehicle that really allows for those things is connection, is conversation, is all of those things that allow us to really externalize a lot of our problems and then deal with them appropriately. And so what happens is I feel like people get into the habit of having, let's just make a distinction, like these, I statement conversations. Never people don't inquire to them. People don't ask questions. And when they don't ask questions, you won't feel as much a desire to share because you don't feel like you're being listened to or heard or even cared about. And then what happens is enough time doing that, or let's just say no outlets to have real conversations, and life goes on. And a lot of these problems that really should be externalized and spoken about, you feel like there's no shared space to really discuss them in a healthy manner, and they end up just getting bottled up. And the way I like to think about emotions getting bottled up is that all emotions kind of need a place to be felt, seen, and heard. And when they don't, they'll pop out in inappropriate places. Like, I think in general, the idea of somebody who's very angry, it's very rarely, anger is, I feel like, often something that has not been given space where it should, and then it needs to pop out in other places. So all of a sudden you'll get angry because someone didn't say something nice to you. Are you really mad because someone didn't say something nice to you? Or it's a million other things that are going on that have not been given enough space to actually have a healthy outlet, and now need to pop up in all of the worst places. And then the worst part is that those create kind of cycles, like a feedback, like a loop that, create, obviously people don't want to open up to people who are angry, short-tempered, and then you don't want to open up because you feel like people don't care. And then it kind of creates a cycle that is, very dangerous. And then all of a sudden, later down the line, somebody says, wow, here I am with this really big mental health issue, because incrementally down the line, each thing didn't really get the light of day.
This hits very deeply to me because I know that this is something that, interesting enough, I've lived through it. I had a ton of anger, and it manifested in all these different ways. And it's actually interesting because the first time we really met and really actually started to have conversations was at a point in my life, which was, at 19 years old, the summer coming up after we both spent a year abroad studying in Israel. I had met you, and at that point in my life, I was, I was just coming off living off a year of, a lot of years of just pure emotion and exhaustion, not really understanding any of my emotions, any of my feelings, and I had no way of sorting them. and we spent the summer working in a camp together. And on one of the first days, we just started having conversations. And I remember you were asking, it would never became something would come up. You'd actually ask me questions. You didn't say, and then it never became you feel this way, and then you said, and then you created actually shared space because you didn't say I felt this way. You would ask me questions about about what I was saying, and you were forcing me. Not forcing is actually the worst word. You were allowing a conversation to take place, a place for me to get my emotions out, or to allow them to come out, and we were able to connect. It's why I think we share a very strong bond to this day because of that summer we spent. We shared a lot of our ideas, a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our emotions, feelings, and really everything in between.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so funny because it's not like we're in contact, every day or even often, and yet 5 years have gone by. We get on a call and talk for an hour and a half as if without a hiccup. That really blows me away, and I think it's exactly like you said. When you have more conversations, which again I really believe is the absolute bedrock, is creating conversations by asking questions that allow you to have deep and penetrating conversations, which allow you to form real relationships that are not, or let's say, less dwindled by the passage of time alone, because there's something that you share which is real that's still there 5 years later. If all you talk about is the weather, though the weather changes. And I really also kind of want to talk about a little bit just the mindset, I guess, a little more about being someone who asks all the questions, being someone who starts conversations with a question oriented mindset, is that you want to get into the mindset of being a giver, of really desiring to create a space where the other person can open up. And that means, what I mean is a giver, that you go to them. You say, what's going on in your world? You're willing to leave all of your problems and your bubble behind for a moment to kind of get in there with them and see what's going on, and really, just try to understand it and try to understand people. And it often, not always, and this is also a difficult part about it, because you do make yourself vulnerable, because there's generally something about yourself that you want to share. And if you ask questions, they may never ask you questions about yourself, but that will also tell you something about the person. This is maybe something you don't want to share with. Maybe it's a person that you don't want to share with because they clearly are not so interested in you. But often I find that once they feel validated, heard, understood, cared about, they will almost always start asking about your life in a genuine and meaningful way. And I think really focusing on those things to begin conversations, doing that for weeks, months, years, over the course of a lifetime, can really impact the relationships you have and the longevity of them.
I mean, I'm again just absolutely blown away because everything you've said is true. If I'm actualizing what you're saying in real time and thinking about the relationships that I've been able to cultivate, the ones where I can share, and also the errors that I've made in friendships and with people, of not asking the questions and calling to them and not effectively communicating with people what I needed from them. And I think when you don't effectively communicate what you need from a friendship, a relationship, or what you're actually asking for, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. And when you get disappointed, then it can manifest in resentment. And when you resent and you don't actually share those feelings and you keep them internalized, well, now they have to come out somehow. The emotions, I've done as much as I possibly can of trying to control and shut off my emotions, and I can firmly say it's really not possible. They come out in some way and somehow.
Yeah, no matter what. And I think that it really is it tricks people into thinking that they really can quiet these emotions, quiet these problems, because as your day goes on, you go through cycles, and you don't always feel bad about something, even if you feel bad about it. So, something will happen that's bad. In the next day, you wake up and you're not thinking about it as much and you feel okay. And you kind of have the impression that it was dealt with, taken care of, and that you could move on. And almost inevitably it comes back to show its face at another point in time in less convenient or less appropriate contexts, and it never really gets dealt with an a proper without a proper understanding, space, time, feeling to really feel the emotions that come with it. You know what I mean? I think sometimes with negative emotion, we want to run away from it as opposed to feeling it so thoroughly that it passes through you, that it, does its course like a virus. Not in a virus that it's always so bad, but in a virus, the sense that it goes through you. Okay, you sleep a little more now, you maybe drink a little more water, and then it goes, and you've given it its time and place, you've given it the right space to heal, and now you can appropriately move on. And I think also with the being with the sharing with the sharing a space with people, you're right, because if you think about it, every time you want to begin a conversation, there is something that you want, and I feel like on a deep level what you want is connection in some form or another. And if you were to kind of draw back that you want connection as opposed to just starting these conversations like we said with I statements, if you actually realize that you want connection, it'll change the way that you start these conversations. It'll be a lot more oriented toward getting you your desired result. But the truth is, I think like you were saying, effectively communicating what you want to people is really what can allow the appropriate and healthy conversation to happen. So in the sense of, if you want connection, you start with question. That works out nicely. But if there's something that you really need to say, it might not happen by just asking questions, because people may not know that you really need to say something, that you really need to talk. But I think you can effectively do the same thing by just telling people what you need. Hey, man, I really need you to listen. I'm dealing with something very difficult. Can you give me 10 minutes? Or when can you give me 10 minutes? When works for you? There's something really pressing on my mind that I need to talk about. And that also, in the same way as asking questions, makes people feel validated, needed, and become very great and active listeners, and giving you the space to really externalize whatever it is that you need to get out.
And there's something vulnerable about it too, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Because essentially you're saying, I need you.
It's so easy to write a text to somebody, hey, what's going on? Because when you're asking that question, hey, what's going on, you're not really asking. You're not, if you send somebody a text message, hey, like you're starting a conversation, hey, what's up? If they basically write back, I'm all good, or this is it, for the rarely do you get like an actual response, because we've been conditioned to communicate this way of asking a question that we don't actually want to know the answer to. We do want to know what's going on in their lives, but we don't want them. We're not actually giving them a platform or giving them an entry into the bubble to communicate.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's honestly really funny that you brought up that example, because I remember I remember this very well. One time I had a summer after I spent a few years in yeshiva. I came back and I had a very difficult summer, just kind of readjusting and finding my place a little bit, and getting steady work and stuff like that. And it was a really, really difficult summer for me. And I remember coming back and seeing a whole bunch of friends that I hadn't seen in a while. And they were like, hey, what's up? How's your summer? I said, it was really difficult, really tough, pretty awful, actually. And more often than not, they just didn't know how to respond. Like, that wasn't one of the, appropriate responses to that question. It was like, no, we're not asking a real question. It's just common courtesy. You say, hey, what's up? And, there's honestly a truth to that. It was probably my bad for not reading that appropriately, but it was funny to just respond to that question with as true a statement as you can bring to the table, and just realizing that, it wasn't the space for it, because like you said, often those questions are not questions.
It's
niceties.
It happens all the time. I mean, I'm very blessed that I have a friend who somebody I can go to, and that I'm lucky enough, and that if I write text them like, hey, what's up? Like, what's good? And like, this is bad. I'm going to take active hopefully take active steps to stop doing this and say, hey, this is someone I need to talk. When I say what's good, they'll call and they'll know, oh, it's time to actually oh, this guy's got something that really wants to talk about. We'll do the little dance over text messaging, but that person knows, hey, if I'm texting in that way, it means we got to hop on a call and actually talk. And there are times and I'm lucky, times where I'm able to actually overcome my own insecurities and vulnerabilities. And I think vulnerable is something I want to touch on after this, because I think there's such a vulnerability about going to somebody and saying, hey, like you said, I'm somebody asking what is wrong? What is really going on? With someone who sends that text of what's up, it's what's going on. And then actually getting an answer back, that's raw. It's powerful. It's emotional. It makes people feel, I think, uncomfortable.
100%. It really does. And what I believe you're really not you in particular, I'm saying what we're worried about by making ourselves vulnerable is really the acute pain that is instilled when you do go out and make yourself vulnerable to somebody, you share your pain with somebody, and they immediately disregard it, invalidate it, and shut it down. There are a few things that are more, painful than that. And I think in general, really, our pain is the thing that we hold closest to our heart. It's the thing that we, in a kind of weird way, identify with most, because the thing that we share least is the thing that we hold closest to ourselves and are most hesitant to share, because we won't do it unless we feel like there is a context, like there is a place where it will be heard and valued the way we do. And that's why it's funny, because often when we bring up an issue, we do want a response, we do want a potential solution, but the first step is often just validating the pain, saying, wow, that really sucks. I don't know what that's like, or I'm really sorry, or whatever it is, to, make them feel like that part was understood, felt, and heard before even beginning to come up with a solution or try to help somebody solve a problem, or anything like that, is to really validate it and make them feel like they have, that they opened up for a good reason, that their vulnerability was maintained and their dignity was restored. And then when they feel like that, also your advice will be taken a lot more seriously, will be taken a lot more intimately. Well, they'll feel like it's a lot more sensitive to them, to who they are.
And I'm interested in hearing. There's something that I think plays into it, because what springboarded this conversation was when you don't deal with issues, right? You don't actually take the time to feel your emotions, to internalize what's going on. Time doesn't stop, and time does pass time. Do you think that's just an illusion that people have?
So I'll tell you also from a sort of recent experience that I had, which was last summer. I went through something that was pretty difficult to me, and I had dealt with it enough to kind of put it on the side and move on. And it gave me the notion that I had effectively dealt with it. And I don't believe time solves problems. I think that time gives you enough space to appropriately solve problems. Because I think when we are in a problem, when we are dealing with something, we can't view it from the outside. We can't see it in a healthy way, and therefore act effectively to address it, to address whatever's going on. And I'll say, for me personally, I had put this thing to the side for close to a year, and then thank God, my fiance recently got engaged, who is such an incredible person, and really, I think in the best way, wants the absolute best for me, and will tell me things that she knows I need to hear, as opposed to the things that I want to hear. And she really opened, or I felt like, the need to open up about this again. And after talking about it, found out that I had not dealt with it entirely by any stretch. It was still very present and still influenced a lot of my thoughts, actions even, that I was not really giving it credit for, because time itself had given me the illusion that it was done, that it had already been, wrapped up, packaged, put away, to its appropriate place in the file cabinet. Not at all. The papers were everywhere, and they had spilled into parts of my life that I didn't expect because I thought it was uncomfortable for me, obviously. And because it was uncomfortable, as soon as I felt I was in a place of comfort, I didn't desire to go and just open up that, can of worms again. I just kind of left it to the side and thought that it had been appropriately dealt with. But Shiran really, she helped me deal with it again. Thank God for her. She's really amazing. And that's, I think, what's so incredible. It's just relationships that are very real. And on the aside, what she said to me was so shocking. I told her this, this thing that had been difficult for me, and she said, "Okay, well, did you tell your father?" That was the first thing, and I was like, I can't believe that is what you went to. Like, that's what you said. That was so unexpected for me. And at the same time, I knew it was exactly what I needed to hear. I knew that the answer was going to be going to people who really have my back, who really love me, who I know that I will get support from, and I know they'll tell me the best things for me.
And I don't mean to pry too deeply. Whatever you're willing to share is totally okay with me. I'm interested. Have you been able to, I guess, on the outlook, understand, or do you know why you didn't open up to your father, to your dad, about this issue?
Yeah, 100%. I didn't want to disappoint him. There's a degree of shame that happens if you take responsibility for your problems, because then at the end of the day, you did it. You know what I mean? You created the space for that to happen. You dropped the ball in whatever way that is. And, on the aside, it's not good to get down on yourself for this, because we're not perfect by any stretch. And it's important to swallow your mistakes and then have the courage to really open it up. And I think, to me, one of the most courageous thing that people can do is forgive themselves, because so often I see people will hold on to problems that they have, and they'll feel like they're too good, or they're not good enough, let's say, to actually deal with the problem. They're still sitting in it because they feel like they deserve this, or they need this, or whatever it is. They made this choice and they're going to just suffer because, pride or dignity or whatever ego driven illusion it tells them. But to really look yourself in the eye and say, wow, I'm really suffering and I can't deal with this, and it's going to be embarrassing, but then to own up to it and take the appropriate steps to help yourself, to me, makes all the difference. I mean, that's what allows you to start going to the right people, start having the right conversations, start putting yourself in the right direction. And it really comes down to a sentence, a phrase that I like so very much, which is, you want to be a person who wants the right answer more than they want to be right. You have to want the right answer more than you want to be right. And so naturally, our ego and emotions will be quick to cover up and be very defensive and saying, no, we're right, I'm good, and protect yourself, as opposed to what stems real growth is opening up, kind of cutting away whatever was wrong, and then moving on and being able to, in a real sense, care for yourself the way that you would care for somebody else. And that if you saw that they needed something, you would help them, as opposed to keeping them in the rut like we so often do to ourselves.
I mean, again, you got me blown absolutely away. I'm interested in what there's a lot of in there that I want to unpack, but one thing that really stuck to the front of the top of my head is the not for, there are people I know, it happens for me, and personally I know it happens to people who I've talked to, where you get so stuck in your own mistakes. You get your mind starts to ruminate, and those negative thoughts start to go and go and go. But I wonder, and I think this might be the case, is that there's an aspect of, it's easier to blame yourself for everything, because, and there's so much ego driven in that, because it's easier if everything's my fault, then that's a world I can deal with. If everything becomes my fault, then that's a world I can deal with. It gives you a sense of control, because if everything's my fault and I make decisions, well, then I'm in control. I have the power. And that's so egotistical to think that way.
So it definitely is egotistical to think that way about your outcomes, but I think it's actually, I mean, maybe not in, I don't know exactly guess how you mean it, but there is, I think, a very healthy way to think in that mindset, which is that your response is always in your control. You always can control what comes out of you and how you deal with things, not what the things are and having control over the situation, but you can have control over how you act in these situations. The way the way that I like to think about it, if somebody were to ask you, who are you, right? It's a very difficult question to pin down, and again, the way I like to think about it is that there's a you that you act out every day, and then there's a you in your mind who's the ideal. He's telling you always what you could be doing and all the things that you could be doing right, and he's trying to push you in, let's say, the right direction. He's the ultimate judge, um, kind of defining all your actions as whether they're good or whether they're pulling you apart. And you're not that guy. You're not the person, from the highest ideal in your head, but you're also not as bad as you are every day. You're not as bad as the actions that you're doing every day. You're kind of the space that makes up those parts. You are the observer who watches them both interact with each other. And I think you try to do is bridge the gap between them in a healthy way. And so if we really think about it, it takes, I think, a lot more maturity in a sense to say that you really don't know yourself, in the sense where, I don't know, let's say your favorite color is maroon. I don't know. I think my favorite color is maroon. And having that be the case is not something really that you chose. You kind of just found out by being exposed to that color that you really like it. That was something you found out about yourself. You didn't choose it. I feel like there's often we can sense that we really know ourselves, and as opposed to looking at yourself from the outside and saying, "Well, I really don't know, and I really want to learn and listen, and find the best way to work and help myself." Because when you think about it from the outside, you're more effectively able to give yourself the help that you need, like how much easier it is to give advice to a friend than it is to give that advice to yourself. And what I think is also very cool about it is it really sparks a rise in self-awareness when you think that you don't know yourself. Because all of a sudden, when you respond a certain way to things that you wouldn't expect, you become very intrigued. Wait a minute, why did that happen? What caused that? What was that about? Why do I feel mad right now? Where is that coming from? I didn't expect that because I don't know and I want to learn. And the more you think from, let's say, a more humble approach about yourself, I think the more self-awareness you get and the more ability you have to better address what's going on, and the more ability you have to also open up and outsource the help that you may need in different times in your life, because you really just want the best for yourself and you really just care and you want to make it good, as opposed to just drowning yourself in sorrow because you feel like you need this or whatever it is.
So is self-awareness not no self to be self-aware is, if I understand you correctly, and I want to make sure I'm clear because this is such an interesting concept and idea, is self-awareness not saying I know myself, but it's saying self-awareness is actually questioning yourself?
I would say the questioning is the mechanism that leads to self-awareness. Self-awareness is the, let's say, real knowing of self, but that has to be preceded by the earnest and open questioning and not taking it as a given that you already know yourself. I feel like most people, if you were to ask them, "Are you self-aware?" they would say, "Yeah," and then would suffer from the problems that a certain degree of self-awareness would, be able to counteract. And so that's a little weird, right? But I think it stems from that place of humility that really I am always listening to myself. I'm never taking as granted what I am, because also I'm always changing and understanding that, today this didn't make me feel this way and tomorrow it did. And okay, so is this a step of maturity? Did something bad happen? Where am I going? And the more sensitive we can be, I feel like the more effectively we can really help ourselves, the more like minutely sensitive we can be to understanding the incremental steps that lead to a degree of mental healthiness or mental health problems. I think self-awareness is absolutely key, core, and fundamental. And it stems from that place of wanting to know the right answer more than wanting to be right.
And what do you think the biggest obstacle is for somebody to achieve that? What are people missing?
I mean, it's it's hard to say really as if there's something across the board, but I would imagine that it's in some way always related to ego. But ego is you know he's a sneaky guy. Ego can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways, even to the sense where you feel like you need to stay in a problem or you need to punish yourself. That can stem from a source of ego or desiring self pity that people should do things for you. All of these can stem from a source of ego and feeling like you're a victim or entitled, or all of these things can keep you from just moving on and getting the help that you need. It also can come from not having the appropriate healthy relationships. I really believe that. I just want to go back to a little bit, having family, having core relationships that believe in you and that you have positive interactions with a lot can make you feel like the world is a better place to be in, which helps you believe. And as far as I've heard, willing to be wrong about this, anybody can tell me, because again, it's not something that I suffer with so much, but that I hear from other people, is anxiety, in the sense that you are something's going to happen, an event is going to happen, or whatever is going to happen in the future, and you play 40 different scenarios about how it's going to go wrong or going to go bad, and just negative energy, because your overall sense of the world is negative. Your core relationships are giving you negative feedback, and it seems like, at the very bottom, things are not good. That always, you know, disallows you to open up in a healthy way and to make yourself vulnerable to positive outcomes that really can happen when you earnestly make yourself available to opportunities that come your way. But the funny thing is about, negative thoughts, especially about the future, is that so often they are self-fulfilling prophecies. So often you will keep yourself in a rut because you've played the future over so many times that you don't even make yourself open and vulnerable to it, to see what it actually is like, because you've defined it so rigidly in your mind already. And I really think that stems from very core relationships, very, a good group of friends, even just a few who actually understand you, or, family or whatever it is that really gives you the space to open up and understand yourself in a healthier way.
I'm internalizing what you're saying, and I'm always going to be my own biggest, feedback just to somebody who had these conversations, and it just always brings me back to the summer we shared in camp, and where we were having these conversations. And I remember the first time, I don't even remember how it came up, but I remember saying the words, "I hate emotions," and it was just something I would throw out there because I was a loose cannon. I wasn't able to think before I was speaking. I was just pure raw emotion, just throwing it out there, and I just didn't expect anyone to say anything. And you asked the question, why? What is it about emotions that you hate? What? And you would ask me these questions and actually force me to define these things. And a lot of it was about it was about my anxiety, but it was manifesting in these comments that I throw out there. And you'd ask me these questions, but we'd go on and on and on. But it would always usually end the same way because I was never willing to be wrong. And by wrong, I mean I was never willing to accept any new information because my anxiety, I would think all my scenarios out of my head before, and it always came back to what I'd already believed. So I was hearing new information, but I was so stuck in my anxiety, was so stuck in its own ways that I wasn't internalizing it in the moment. But as we spoke about earlier, time passes by and my anxiety would get worse, and it'd get worse because I wasn't dealing with the emotions. But then when it came time to actually pay the price, of not dealing with my emotions, I was forced to do the hard work. And when you do and you start to do the work, you now have perspective. And when you have perspective, you can look back on it. And now I'm realizing what was going on in those moments, and it's now allowed me to deal with. And as I've gone on, I'm still dealing with it, and I'm still learning new skills. I'm still learning more information. I'm learning that you can do these things, and that the only way to get through it is to actually do the work
Yeah.
if you want to get better.
And I think that's that's I think a perfect thing to remember, because it's that type of, conversation with the comment, like I'm sorry that I don't remember it, but in a comment like, oh, I hate emotions. Emotions are just as valid a source of information as logic can be. They just tell you other things. Listening to your emotions, understanding that that is information that is being computed to you. When you think about it like that, you learn a lot more about yourself, and you can deal with things a lot better. And what I think I mean when I say like dealing with them is that exact question: is you hate emotions? Okay, why? What is it? Understanding, actually opening up and making yourself vulnerable to new information, to really, speak about it and actually allow the emotions to penetrate, and then saying, wow, like I'm really, sad right now. It was actually kind of funny. I think this was actually something that I was very proud of myself for doing. I had gone out with a girl for a little while, and I was still interested in continuing, and she said no, and fine, you know what I mean? That's totally cool. And I thought for myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to be sad for the next 2 days, and I definitely cannot, coil up, just go to bed, shut the world out for a little bit. I have to go on with my day and just be sad for 2 days, at least 2 days, whatever it was, a week, you know what I mean? Give yourself the appropriate amount of time for however deep, the feelings were, whatever it was, but to really just swallow it, understand it, try to listen to it as in the sense of, internalizing the feeling, internalizing what it was, why, and then allowing it to pass through you, not hiding from it, not shunning it, not putting it aside. And I remember I walked away, not even a week later, feeling very healthy about it. And it has never crept up on me since, because I feel like I very realistically and appropriately dealt with the problem. I understood it. I took the time. I didn't, hide from it. I didn't run away. A real feeling. I, internalized it and then was able to move on.
Something that just I'm so interested in because it makes so much sense now. You feel something happens, like that's a valid thing to be sad about, and then you allow it to internalize. You investigate. And how does any good investigation start with? Asking questions. What is it about this? Why is this coming up? What else is coming up when this hits? What else am I feeling? What are the other emotions? Because it's all a lot of it is really just all interconnected. You make something from if you don't resolve those issues that are connected, they come up. It happens all the time in my life, and I don't mean to personalize, but I think it happens up for a lot of people as well, where you don't you feel this emotion, sadness, right? When you go to somebody, I'm sad, it becomes something you're uncomfortable with, and when you're uncomfortable, you seek automatically to get away from it. You distract yourself. You numb the pain. I don't want to feel emotions. I take a pill that it doesn't allow me to feel emotions, or I drink alcohol, which is never a great idea. It doesn't actually do what you need it to, but you do something. It might be through marijuana. It might do mine were alcohol, marijuana, for sure. But eventually you have to actually evaluate those emotions if you want to be able to move on. So it's
Yeah,
so.
I think a few points just on that
Mhm.
idea was, it's really the same exact way we talked about question asking before. When you ask questions, you give the space for somebody to really open it up about it, in the same way with your own self. You ask the right questions to yourself, and you will give yourself the space to really deal with these things, to really understand them, to really investigate, not being scared and not just saying, oh, I feel sad. You know what I mean? Or, oh, how come this happens? Or how come that? Whatever, like asking the really the questions that actually provoke, that actually show that you're giving yourself the space to, think about it, to really spend time with it.
Zach, do you meditate by any chance?
I don't, but I daven 3 times a day, and I think there's a lot of overlap there. I pray.
I do. The reason I brought it up for is because as somebody who's really been doing a lot of work in terms of meditation, and it's something, and I think there's a ton of overlap in prayer, but there's a lot of different types of meditation. There's the guided meditation, breathing meditation, where you focus on certain things and you to clear your mind. And when somebody would tell me when I was so emotional and all these things, I was always curious about, I was so obsessed with clearing my mind. But then I came across somebody called, his name is Naval Ravikant. And if anybody doesn't know who he is, or if you don't, I highly recommend you look him up. He's a brilliant, brilliant guy in tech, but more so in terms of his philosophy on life and the way he goes on it. And his take on meditation for me has always made the most sense, because it's not about not taking away the discomfort. It's about actually sitting in it. His version of what he basically says meditation is, it's the art of doing nothing. You sit and you don't do anything. He doesn't recommend you do it with any app. You sit for 60 in his try, and he says do 60 days for 60 minutes a day. It can be the first thing ideally the first thing you do in the morning. You just sit in a comfortable position. You don't have to, if you want to breathe in certain ways, you can breathe, but focus on nothing in particular. And what that does is it allows whatever is going on in your mind. You're not doing anything actively. Things come up. And I've been so terrified of this. Once I heard what this was, I said, this makes the most sense. It's what you get out of it. And I'm not saying if you're obviously someone having a panic attack, this isn't what you should do in the moment. But if you want to actually deal and stop your panic attacks and stop your anxiety, or at least understand it, that makes the most sense. You sit and you do nothing, and and everything will come to the surface, and you're forced to deal with it, to actually review it. The whatever pain, suffering, all those emotions, they come up to the surface. And he says after 60 days, and I know a lot of people who have done it have had unbelievable experiences. I've been too big of a chicken shit to actually try it because I'm afraid of what's going to come up. But I'm hoping, it's my goal. And I guess now that I'm publicly announcing it to an audience of people that can hold me accountable, hopefully this will be the step that takes me to go and do it. I was curious what your thoughts are on that concept.
Yeah, so I think first of all that's a brilliant concept, but it's really, as far as I can tell, when you remove all of the distractions, which is why I really believe there's a lot of this philosophy built into the framework of Judaism, as we actually are dealing with now. The 9 days, the 9 days that lead up to one of the worst days in Jewish history. We kind of remove certain pleasures from ourselves and comforts, because often they can give us the notion that things are okay, and often things are not okay. And when you remove that, you are left with kind of less. You know what I mean? You're just left with yourself, and you have to actually kind of deal with yourself. You've kind of addressed certain lies that you may have been living in or telling yourself. And I think also it built into prayer is spending time, um, let's say being with God is like spending time addressing your highest ideal. Whatever you think is ultimately good and the best thing for you is what you are trying to interact with, trying to communicate with. And when you do spend time there and you don't rush it, and you actually, give it the same idea, the space to actually, come out in a very similar way, you'll find the things come to you. Wow, I really I shouldn't have done that, or I should have, whatever it was. And then, okay, that's real. That was real. That happened. And now, that you've, let's say, more consciously addressed it, more consciously become aware of it, you can now more consciously feel it. You can more consciously address, you can more consciously, hopefully move on and integrate the experience. And I think that that's a fascinating approach. 60 minutes of meditation. Um, I think there's a lot of things that lend itself to a similar experience that's aiming for.
Right. It's really just understand. I think what was so fascinating about it is that it's the art of doing nothing. a lot of it is around, right. There's the meditation app, and I have a lot of meditation app. I have a few different meditation apps on my phone. Headspace is great. Calm is great. Waking Up by Sam Harris is one of the best apps I've ever seen in terms of meditation. Sam's incredible. I would, if you're interested, I would for sure check him out. But
Yeah,
there's,
definitely.
but there's something about all the focusing on breathing, and I think it's great in a pinch. I think if you are having an anxiety attack, that is what you should do, is to focus on breathing to distract yourself. But I think it all comes full circle to what we were talking about all the way back in the beginning about time. And if you, right, it comes up and then you don't deal with those emotions. And I know that it actually happens to me when I'm in prayer as well. And I feel some randomly these emotions, so they're not so random, but emotions will come up, and I'll have flashes of things that I've done that I'm not the proudest of, or things, just interesting things, and I'll immediately be so uncomfortable that I have to do something to get out of it. But if you don't force yourself to deal with them, and like you said also, it's new. I'm getting new information, and until you analyze and process that information, it just sits.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere.
And I think I meant to touch on this point before and then said something else and kind of lost my train of thought at the moment. But I just want to circle back to that idea of kind of numbing the pain, because time, distractions, and different things of the sort can do that. They can numb the pain. But if you think about the reason that we go and numb pain physically, is not just so that you don't feel things. It's so that you can appropriately fix the problem. Like I remember, which I thought was so interesting, when I was in camp. I'm not sure. I went actually back to that same camp the next year. I'm not sure if I was there. No, you were there my first year. I don't think you were in my second year. Either way,
Correct.
yeah. So the next summer, I had just a slew of the most ridiculous, unnecessary injuries in a row. Whatever, culminating with me just walking out of my bunk, slipping on the wet grass, and sliding into a thing of raised pavement, directly into my
Oh,
knee, and needing stitches. And so,
boy.
in the infirmary, which by this point in time, I was already best friends with all, the people there, and knew the kids and everything, because just ridiculous. And I'm in there, and the doctor is going to stitch me up. And he puts in the anesthetic. That's what it's called, right? To numb it.
Mm-hmm.
He puts it in, and it hurt. It hurt to have it put in. And I thought that he was just telling me that he was putting it in, and he was really actually stitching it up. And I was, so surprised that when I picked my head up, nothing was, sutured at all. And then when he really did it, I didn't feel a thing. And it allowed for him to do his job best, because I wasn't in pain, moving around, squirming, whatever. And then it was obviously better for me because I felt less of it. And so the numbing has a very specific purpose, but it doesn't end at numbing. If he had just numbed the pain, walked away, and then the next day I'd be waking up with the same problem on my knee. You numb the pain to stitch the problem. You numb the pain to address the issue. It has a function. It just isn't the answer. There's something like, I love the word in English called palliate. To palliate means to address the symptoms of an issue without addressing the underlying issue. Like taking Advil because you have cancer. You know what I mean? But a lot of times that is the function that numbing can do for us. That it can give us the notion, give us the idea that we've, accurately, like we were saying before, that that we've realistically addressed the problem, when in actuality, you're going to wake up the next day and your knee is still busted open.
Right. It's like I don't know if it was, I think it was with you we were chatting a couple of days ago when we were chatting about this topic, and the thought that popped in my head, and I've been thinking about this for a while now. When you have a headache, or a headache is part of your brain, but let's say your ankle hurts, right? And the doctor tells you, right, you take Advil to lower the swelling. It has the physical properties as well, and it's stopped, but it's supposed to alleviate the pain. So I take the Advil, my pain is alleviated, but whatever is structurally wrong in my ankle or in your physical body part, that problem isn't addressed. And the solution that they give you in that sense is time. Time stops it, but in that moment, my ankles taking the Advil didn't didn't actually fix anything. It just allowed you to be comfortable enough to allow the time, which was actually the remedy.
100%. And it's time, but it's not just time. Even in that case, it's not just time because it's time. But in the meantime, your body is doing a million things to try and make that ankle better. And the same way, time
Right.
can have a very positive effect on mental things if you spend that time creating much, more positive relationships and healthier outlooks. And you know what I mean? You might actually have addressed the problem without needing to, specifically address the problem because you've done a lot of work in other places and made your surroundings, made your environment a lot healthier. The problem may not be an issue. And yeah, because of time. Time is absolutely essential for addressing issues. It's just not enough on its own.
It's so. I mean, that's just so true. I'm interested. I'm interested in how you think this plays into it, and in terms of because I think the goal and the main idea is to create those meaningful relationships. Once you create those, and I'm going to go back later on this, and I want to know what you think about like how to actually develop and some advice of developing meaningful relationships to sum that up. But there's a specific pinpoint, and that's when you do develop those relationships and you are able to share your pain and your burdens. What role do you think that plays in a relationship?
So, what sharing the pain? What role does that play in relationships?
Right. When you create, sorry, I may not be
No, no,
asking
no.
the
I'm
right
listening. I
question.
just want to understand what it is that you're asking.
I know. I, I'm wondering what about developing that relationship, and it allows you to when you do find somebody to really share your life. It could be on a relationship, right, on a surface, so more surface level of a friendship, but even more so on a personal relationship. It could be right. You mentioned you got engaged, you have a fiance. The dynamic of that relationship, and how does that play in terms of you share, because to become close you have to share, but when you do share, you put burdens on people.
Well, yeah. So if you think to some degree about pain as the thing that is most deepest to you, it is the thing that stops you from having, relationships, the thing that stops you from opening up and being vulnerable. And it is also the things that capitalizes on that vulnerability if it's validated and responded to well. When you,
What happens if it's not?
so what happens
Sorry, I
if it's not
apologize.
is
What
that,
happens if it's not?
sorry.
What happens if it isn't?
So I mean, everybody's got varying degrees of experience with this idea of making yourself vulnerable and then having it rejected, and I think that's why they don't do it more often. And again, I think it goes back to that kind of core idea of having a generically positive outlook, because thank God I really can't stress about how much gratitude I have for the relationships I have in my life. I really believe that I and feel like I know some of the best people on the planet, and I feel like also my fiance in particular I think is a really extraordinary person. And what that happens is you spend enough time with people like that, and you become a lot more kind of comfortable or a lot quicker to make yourself vulnerable because you feel like it more often than not will be responded to well. But you're right. When it doesn't get responded to well, it is, I think there are different studies that say it's 5 times more damaging than any positive thing. A positive thing, you will need 5 times as much positive influence as negative to really have an overall positive relationship and positive, interactions. And in general, it is with, I believe, relationships. John Gottman, he is a psychologist and studies relationships for many, many years now. And what I like about him so much is that all of his conclusions are pretty much empirical. He just studies and observes couples, and then he says, and then he draws all of his conclusions by this are what the people who are doing well are doing. This this is what the couples who have great relationships are doing, and this is what the ones who have bad relationships are doing. And it's just this is what it is. He'll even say sometimes, I don't know why this is the case, but this is one of those things. 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative um, interactions is what allows you to continuously feel the confidence to make yourself vulnerable. And a lot, I believe, really a lot is that shift of perspective, like we've talked about, going back to the beginning, the shift of perspective of wanting the right answer more than you want being right. The shift of perspective of being a giver, going to people and creating a space where they feel comfortable making themselves vulnerable to you will create more opportunities for you to make yourself vulnerable and have it be appropriately responded to. Instilling, I believe, instilling habits and skills like that over the course of time will give you, exponential results. And I can say now, thank God, I really don't, I really have, it's not so hard for me to create meaningful relationships. Thank God. You know what I mean? And I really believe a lot of that comes down to the making yourself, going to them first, making yourself the questioner, making yourself the one who is interested, who is actually earnestly, genuinely interested in the person you're talking to, because that genuine interest, responded to with genuine interest, I believe is the bedrock of relationships that give you the space to make yourself vulnerable and deal with these things in a healthy context.
For somebody out there that's listening and is missing and is missing these things, they're not having these. They don't feel like they have these meaningful relationships. What are some action points that they can take to start to start the process?
So I believe it's it's kind of tough to say because people respond to things in different ways, and I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not like studied in this. I just have my own experiences to go off of. But I would say it would be first, as far as I can tell, try to really be an observer. Watch how often you are the one who starts conversations with I, and then ask yourself, well, what did you want from the conversation? Try to just pay attention to your own activities because a lot of them you're not really so conscious of. We spend a lot of time running through our day, kind of running through the motions robotically, and to just try to watch yourself a little more and see your activities because from the outside you can make adjustments. So what would that mean? It would be try to, I don't know, 5-10 times a day go up to somebody after you're feeling that you want to share something and just translate it into a question and see what that does for you, and just watch, see what that does for you. And then I would also say, in terms of feeling like those relationships aren't there, I feel like often we know people who are givers. We know people who we can say to them, hey, can you listen to me for a little bit? I just need to talk about something. When do you have the time? There's somebody hopefully that we look up to, somebody that we think has what to offer us, even if that literally just is being quiet and actively listening and saying, I'm sorry, that's tough. What can we do about it? Problem solving together, whatever it is. It's just, I believe, from that sense of observation, question asking, that leads to self-awareness, that leads to really making the mature decisions and actions that will put yourself in the best environment to change.
That's really, really strong advice. I, I mean, as I'm saying, starting the sentence with I'm trying to catch myself, but it's
No,
just
we need
a
to
lot of what
stop.
you
I want to
just.
actually just touch. It's not, the problem is not saying I sentences, because it is actually, when you say something I and then somebody else says something I, there is a shared sense in that. Sometimes if there's enough, context to a relationship, that really can be an opening. Like you said, with one of your friends, when you say, hey, what's up? He knows. That's built off the context that you have. It's almost like what's up in that framework does not just mean what's up. I is not necessarily the wrong thing to say, especially in the middle of conversations. You say, I understand. I also feel that way. You know what I mean? The problem is
Mm-hmm.
the setting the framework of the conversation to be an I contest. I think that's actually an important distinction. I'm happy that you brought that up, because it's not poisonous. It's just something to be very conscious of. It just has a specific context, I think, to be done right.
I agree. So Zach, as we wrap up here, there's a running segment we do with every guest here on the show, and That's you. Both of us are going to share one thing that. What's one thing that you're currently worried about?
Who's going first?
You.
I got it. I have a little bit of, maybe we'll call it anxiety, just about being able to make money, support a family. I'm stepping into a new life very soon. Thank God, I'll be getting married. Um, Hopefully, the middle of September. Probably nobody will be there because of the global pandemic going on. But thank God, my parents should be able to fly in. That is really important for me. And it's just a lot of, I believe, a lot of times when you're going to have a massive change in your life, there are certain things beforehand that kind of give you a little bit of information about what's coming. So, for instance, you're going to go to college. That's a whole new thing. But you go and you buy the right supplies and you look up your classes and you see what's coming. Now, there is a little bit with that by, creating a relationship and seeing who you're going to be dealing with. But there's so much of it that's just so new, and there's pressure, which I believe is a really good thing. The responsibility that makes us grow, that really provides the meaning for life, and it's exciting. I'm very excited about it, but I would be remiss to say that it's not something that makes me nervous. It's not something that I'm you know dealing with. um it is. And yeah, I don't know how much I could really do about it beforehand, but it's there.
That's great. Well, if I don't share and I ask my guests to share, it wouldn't make me not. It wouldn't look great for me. So the one thing that I'm currently worried about right now is when I do believe that this global pandemic is going to end. Hopefully, a lot sooner than what I think than what they're saying. But I am worried about what life after the pandemic looks like, because the pandemic came and it feels like March, the beginning, was the longest time ago, but also feels like it was just yesterday, and my life was kind of put on hold. Right now, I don't have a full-time job, and I've been applying. It's been really hard to get companies to even respond. Like, if even I'm like so grateful if I even get like a rejection like email back. Like, that's like awesome. Like, at least I know you looked at it. But a lot of them I don't even get anything back from, and I'm curious. I'm curious, and I'm worried about where I'm gonna be at 25 when this is all said and done. And I think that, and I don't think it's something that I shouldn't worry about at all. I think it's something that it's good to worry about, because it's good to think about when this does end. Where am I going to be? What do I want? My life is very, very different than it was when I entered this pandemic. I didn't have this podcast; did not exist. It was just an idea. It was just an idea that I was way too scared to take the leap for. I didn't know what form it was going to take. I didn't know if I could do it. And I do worry about that still, but I'm not, and that's something I'm not really that worried about anymore. I do believe in this platform. I do believe in this podcast. I'm just worried about what it means when life comes back. That's
Yeah,
just something
I'm actually, by the
I'm
way,
worried about.
I wanted to say I'm really blown away that you made this podcast, and I know that it happened during the pandemic, because I think enough time off of whatever we normally do makes us kind of address our bigger goals and the things that we really want to happen, but may have not allocated the appropriate amount of time or energy or even emotional investment to do, has now been given space. And I absolutely love that you took action and that you said, if not now, when, and actually made this. And more than that, I know, from our conversations that happened at camp years ago, that this is not something that was necessarily in your future, had you not done active things to make yourself better, to put yourself on a better track, to really, making yourself a giver. This whole podcast is a place where people actually feel like they can open up, and I'm really impressed. And I just got to say, I'm blown away by it.
Well, I mean, I'm very thankful that if I listen, I don't know if I don't meet you and I'm not in whatever state I am, and you're not in whatever. If you weren't so confident and had already put in all that work, that when we crossed paths that summer, I don't know. Like, I don't know where I'd be. I think I mean, there's no doubt that we're able to pick up the phone after many years of not talking continuously to jump back on in a platform like this and to have a conversation as if we were waking up and 5 weeks into camp, as we've already established that pattern. It's this, and I'm telling this to you, the listeners. This is the testament to building those meaningful relationships. That's what happens. It's not unobtainable. Anybody can do it if you're willing to, if you put in the work and you're aware. So I'm so happy that I knew when I started this podcast and when you reached out to me, I knew that I wanted to talk to you because of everything that we've talked about here today on this episode. There's a lot more that I want to get into, but just for time's sake, I think there's so much that people want to process. I'm glad you were willing to come on and share your experiences. I'm glad that I was able to convince you and able to at least share information with you about what mental health is and how everything we've spoken about, I truly do believe completely connects into mental health. And I'm so thankful, Zach. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. It was really awesome, and I really appreciate you reaching out because, again, like I definitely would not have, prompted myself to go and be on a podcast about mental health. But I really appreciate the prompt, the push, and the confidence in me to go and make it happen.
I appreciate that, Zach. If there's people out there that are listening and they're interested in finding out more, that might be interested in reaching out to you, where would they be able to find you?
For sure. I have I actually make a little content I used to do it every day. I've been, a little mentally preoccupied, so it's been more difficult, a little less consistent, but I have something called Another Day, Another DOF. I hope, maybe I'll tell you, you could put it in the description or something. You could definitely find me on Instagram there. You can connect with me on Facebook. I'm happy to, answer anyone's questions. If they do write to me on Facebook, I will, be happy to exchange numbers, whatever it is. If really anybody appreciates it, I would be more than happy to speak with them.
If anyone out there feels that way, I highly recommend reaching out to Zach. He will take the time when he has it in his own time, and he'll get back to you, and you'll have a great experience. Zach, thank you so much.
Just I spell my name kind of weird, so if you are looking for me on Facebook, it's ZakLenik.
Absolutely. I'm going to put this in the description below, Zach. I appreciate it. Bye. Thank you to Zach for coming on. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I know there's a lot that I'm going to take away from that conversation. I learned a ton. If you're interested in coming on and sharing your ideas and your story about mental health and what you've dealt with, I'd be more than happy to have you on. Please feel free to reach out. If you're interested in seeing Zach's content that he alluded to in the episode, I'll add a link in the description below. Lastly, please subscribe, like, share it with somebody. If you're enjoying this content, let me know. All feedback is encouraged. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys next week.